Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us this evening. It is Monday, October 20th, and you are joining Promethean Action, Promethean Pact Strategic Discussion and Overview. First of all, I want to start by saying that I will encourage all of you who are on this call to go and listen, if you haven't already done so, to the discussion earlier by Barbara Boyd, her weekly Monday overview that she starts with. And the title of that overview was Assass- Assassination and Riots, the Only Cards the Empire Has Left. And this is what we're going to continue to take up tonight, in a sense, with Michael Stager. But in the opening of her Monday strategic overview, as we know, this past weekend was insane riots, the ludicrous riots and protests against the policies of President Trump that were led by the Antifa crowd and those who are pushing the so-called No Kings rallies. And many people may have seen this, may have seen these people in your areas of the country and wondering, what is this all about? I think Barbara laid it out very clearly that this isn't just protesters. This is the British Empire, the enemy apparatus, who is out for killing and destruction. And her title and opening, Assassination and Riots, is the only cards that the empire has left, is absolutely right. If you see this, many of you probably have heard that or saw, she reiterates in her opening the announcement by FBI Director Kash Patel of the findings by the Secret Service of the hunter's nest that was found near where President Trump exits his Air Force One. And at the same time, she, followed by that, played a clip from one of these No Kings protest rallies of a man very bluntly discussing why, calling for the killing of ICE agents. And as she said, as we know and have seen, these people will not stop at that. Their intention is to assassinate, kill this President Donald Trump. And this is the only cards that the British Empire has. And so I think that if you are not already a subscriber to Promethean Action, the other thing that she emphasizes is that decades-long fight that we have been involved in exposing this British imperial enemy apparatus, why the British kill American presidents. I'm going to put that in the chat in just a little while here, but I do want to emphasize again that people get a copy of that dossier that we published, that Barbara Boyd co-authored there, and also make sure co-authored, with Bob Ingram, and make sure that people, if you haven't already gotten your copy of that, that you do get a copy of it. So as we continue the discussion here, the question is, we're now 20 days into the insane government shutdown being led by these lunatic Democrats who are calling for ludicrous policies of giving funding to illegal immigrants, healthcare, and who want to continue to push a policy that promotes crime in our cities, that stops Trump's policy for America First, for reindustrializing our cities and our states, and want to continue to push policies that for the green agenda, Green New Deal, insane environmentalist agenda. So that's what's going on while people are suffering and not getting paid. But as Michael stressed in his call for tonight, in his email that was sent out. The topic is going to be pathetic no kings are running defense for gains inside American cities. And so we're going to get at that in terms of how this whole operation is set to stop the needed investments into our cities, into our nation. And this is what President Trump is set to do, which is to rebuilding the U.S. economy. And we have to make sure that we are doing everything we can to ensure a victory for President Trump and his America First agenda. So with that, I will turn it over to Michael and we can get started with the discussion. And I'll put that video in the chat, and also where you can continue to get involved with us by contributing and subscribing to our efforts.
So thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. Let me just get my camera. So there's a couple of things I wanted to discuss tonight. One is the specific topic that the email references, which is, what really is, what is the, why is there this kind of attempt to define Trump as a fascist over these specific policies? You can see it from the predicates, okay, the National Guard and ICE and the facial masks on the ICE officers. These lead to easy, sensual justifications for the reference. But it's much more sinister, and I want to lay out just some of the details in the case regarding this a little bit. I also want to give an ongoing kind of report on the campus activity and campus engagement with young people, because based on dialogue over the last few weeks with people on campus as well as off, there is something kind of extraordinary there that Charlie Kirk was kind of capturing. It wasn't something entirely provoked by Charlie Kirk. It wasn't like Charlie Kirk, but he because of his engagement on the campuses, and I think a lot of this happened after COVID. So after the Trump first term, after the lockdowns of COVID, after the election steal, after J6 and the false flag operation, you then had this growing eruption within the population. And Charlie recognized and was active on campuses. And so he started to do 2 campuses a week practically at some point in 2021, 2022. And he had sustained that up through the last semester of the spring semester of 2025. There is a kind of phenomenon. It's not just within the younger generation. It's been within the entire population. But of course, when younger people and young adults intersect this kind of upsurge in a kind of profound creative identity, a kind of a devotion to truth, a sense of a life or death battle for a society based on truth. That when young people are caught by that, there's a kind of a life-shaping moment, a generation of potential of new leadership, of a new engagement. And so I want to fold that into this question of what is Trump's real domestic economic agenda? Why there are these protests? Why are you rolling out? I mean, literally we have anecdotal accounts and I guess some video footage as well, but eyewitness testimony of people in wheelchairs and walkers basically given a free lunch in a park if they'll come to the No Kings rally. There's something, pathetic about this, but we should dive a little bit deeper and understand where is this coming from, because there is a real battle in the United States, and it's a very real one, and the potential to win it is overwhelming. The potential to win it, let me just say it again, the potential to win this battle in the United States is overwhelming in our favor. And I want to lay out that case because ultimately you'll see the thin gruel that this enemy is feeding the population and the very weak and kind of crumbling ground that they stand on. But let's just put in context the fact that Trump's peace deal has been historic. There was, over the weekend, the kind of earliest real violations. Of course, Hamas was executing criminals or people they felt like were politically rivals to them. It's hard to really discern the truth of anything there, but there were executions by Hamas in Gaza. Then there was a firing of anti-tank missiles at Israelis. These are, as Trump said himself in a press conference with the Australian Prime Minister, these could have been rogue elements. It's hard to say if this is Hamas, if it's deployed. But what Trump continued to emphasize is we had 59 countries sign on to this peace deal, all of the Arabic community, and much of, in almost the entire Islamic world, going as far as Indonesia and Pakistan, the two largest Islamic countries, signed on, were present, the leadership was present there. And so there is a sense of no longer is anyone funding Hamas. No longer is anyone giving protection to Hamas. We've got to solve this Gaza situation. It has to be solved. And so it's holding. People like Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff are now back in Israel to make sure that we get to the second stage of implementation, that we get to reconstruction of Gaza, that we get aid going to the places necessary, that we get Hamas to demilitarize. We don't have cement going to new tunnel construction. We get the destruction of the tunnels, destruction of heavy weaponry. You get a process moving forward. So it's, of course, a tentative situation. It's not secure yet, but it is profound. And then, of course, we have Trump engaged over the next 2 weeks. So this week, Rubio and Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia and Secretary of State Rubio, have already been in discussions. Over the course of this week, they're going to resolve all of the main points of discussion between the U.S. and Russia, and then are going to have a Trump-Putin meeting in Budapest, in Hungary, which is a major capital of Europe. It was one of the main cities of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, something that was dissolved after World War I, and which opened up the door for, a fight between Germany and Russia, inevitably in many ways, because of the kind of the absurdity of the kind of liberal agenda, British liberal agenda after World War I. But it's a major capital. It's also, of course, the seat of opposition to the entire liberal EU order. And so that summit should be happening within the next 2 weeks. Trump will also be between Trump and Putin. And of course, in the environment is a discussion of the Bering Strait Tunnel. This has come up from the head of the Russian Sovereign Wealth Fund, Kirill Dmitriev. This is a plan that goes back really in some sense, to the selling of Alaska in the 19th century to the United States. The potential for a tunnel between the two areas was a major project that our founder, Lyndon LaRouche, promoted. It's something that was under discussion, as this gentleman Dmitriev pointed to, Khrushchev and Kennedy were discussing. The potential for the Arctic development, the potential for water resource development of North America. This is something we've pointed to with the project called NWAPA. We would basically take the Yukon and Mackenzie basins, this kind of Northwest Territories of Canada, water supply that are largely Arctic runoff, and transport them down into the Great American Desert to be a boon for global and U.S. and North American food production and industry and city development and all of the rest. So the potential for development into this corridor is just growing. That's been raised, and Trump, of course, was asked about it. And of course, in Trump's own, great kind of personable approach, said, Zelensky, what do you think about that? And I don't like it. But the potential for these two to meet, as Trump has said directly in his truth posts, that they had a 2.5-hour call last week before he met with Zelensky, which of course was really well coordinated. As Zelensky was landing, Trump was truthing a 2.5-hour dialogue with Putin that just took away any leverage or any kind of idea that Zelensky was going to be getting Tomahawk missiles, or there was any commitment from Trump to escalate this in any way. Tomahawk missiles, the big talk that Zelensky wanted, are nuclear-capable missiles, and Russia would not know if they were nuclear-tipped or not as they headed towards Moscow. So there's just really, that's almost just an inconceivable escalation. Um, so warranted that Trump just outmaneuver that whole operation. But he then revealed that that discussion of 2.5 hours was a certain extensive part of it was on potential U.S.-Russian economic trade and development potentials. Certainly the Arctic is a huge factor. And part of that development of the Arctic is logistics and being able to basically develop the Arctic, its resources, its minerals, its shipping, its transportation, but also then to integrate that into the continent as a whole, so that you're actually integrating it into the broader base, just kind of like California was. We had to connect California to the rest of the country. How do we connect the Arctic to the rest of the country? If that's kind of the new frontier of development. So certainly the Bering Strait Tunnel is one major project in that regard. So that meeting is within 2 weeks, and I'm just painting the context for that meeting. At the same time, Trump has kind of insisted he'll still be meeting with Xi Jinping. There is a major Chinese summit this week. It's called the Fourth Plenum. It's kind of like their 5-year planning. There has been a purge of military leadership. There's certainly some level of intense factional fight within the leadership of China. Xi Jinping's assertion that he will serve for the rest of his life, the way that Mao Zedong asserted, has caused a lot of consternation within certain Chinese factions. I have no clarity on the dynamic or what's happening with it, but it's undoubtable that there is real tension between different political factions. Part of this attempt to kind of leverage the rare earth capability on global trade that happened last week from China was certainly part of some of these internal political factional fights, because there's clearly not total agreement. But Trump has said he's going to meet with Xi Jinping, and it's important because it's not a question of going and begging China to make a deal. It's not allowing China to become the bastion of these globalists who will become a rigid base, because much of China's economic doctrine and dogmas today are almost entirely British liberal free trade economics, despite how communist they claim. And of course, that's really not that surprising within historical context, and where communism ultimately comes from. But we don't want China to become this kind of fortified, kind of this massive North Korea that splits the world into two opposing camps. Even if the entire world was united against China and a small grouping of countries, it still is something that would create the potential for ongoing conflict and war. Better to just keep the door open as much as possible through leadership and through a clarity of what kind of system we want to bring China into. A fair system, but they're going to have to play by the actual rules. But that was the design after World War II. It's why China is basically liberated and a free state today to a large extent. And bring China into that. Trump and I think certain groupings recognize that's necessary. It's not the Wall Street faction that just wants to lay down for China and continue mass offshoring to China, or the radical international left outlook that somehow China is the savior of the world. Both are completely misconceived, but there is a third, oftentimes undiscussed option of establishing a new global system where China is brought in. These internal conflicts in China can play a role in negotiating that, because it's not some monolithic, just communist state that everybody adores, the cult of Xi. There is a sense of some of these disparities, both within China's economic conditions, 600 million people living on $5 a day or less, and also just the role of what is happening in the United States, what role the United States has played in what Trump is actually doing. And certainly Putin has a clarity on the kind of differences between what Trump and MAGA represent versus the old kind of Anglo-American establishment. So Trump will be meeting with Xi at the APEC summit in Korea and with Putin practically within the next 2 weeks. These are major, major summits. And of course, ending the Middle East war It's tentative, but it's happening. And Trump knows he's got context. He's calling on these other countries to say, you guys have to step up. And that's what leadership is. Leadership is not we do everything. We'll control it. You guys stay out of the way. We'll control it. Is kind of, we all know that's the kind of control freak nobody wants to work with. This is American leadership. Hey guys, figure this out. These are your Arab Islamic brothers and sisters. Figure this out. We'll create the space for you to do it, but you guys have to engage and start to help solve these problems. Trump has insisted we have to end the era of radical Islam. And in many ways, Trump's solution in the Middle East is the same solution he's calling for in Europe and Russia and Ukraine. And that is end this globalism and get back to a system of nation states. Radical Islam, Islamic jihad, political Islam is a globalist ideological system, just like communism is, just like this radical liberalism is. What Trump is insisting on, and what American leadership insisted on after World War II, was a system of nation states. And in the Middle East, though it was kind of muddied by the Cold War conflict, it was an Arab nation building project. Egypt, the Gulf countries, there was a nation building in Iraq or Syria. There was a nation building concept because they had never had self-rule. Even if it was monarchies, it was always the Ottoman Empire, British Protectorate, the Persian Empire, the Byzantine Empire, who had never really been them ruling themselves. And this is that concept of nation state and of sovereignty that Trump is coming back to, not the caliphate, but nation building. And the same is true for Europe. And Orban and Hungary are the leading example in Europe, certainly, at least of the kind of Central and Western Europe countries. So that's a big, big context. And the reason I want to just lay that out is because ending these wars will allow the United States political process, this new regime that Trump and MAGA and that we are building. It's a new regime. It's regime change in the United States. That this new regime requires to establish peace abroad to rebuild our home, to rebuild our country. That is nothing new. This is true throughout the course of history. Really, even the emergence of the initial nation state of France under Louis XI was a similar policy of paying countries to not go to war with us, to not go to war with France, so he could focus on consolidating and building the nation state of France and the French people. Excuse me. So this brings us to the No Kings protests. So besides the fact that these are a bunch of cracked out hippie boomers and yuppies and people who still live in nostalgia of the 1960s as some type of glorious revolution, the reality is it's a dying, act of senility. But it's not simply that. It is a smokescreen to protect the massive gang activity in the United States. And so over the weekend, I was provoked by some of the things that Will Wirt said in his class. If you didn't listen to that class on Saturday night, the Entente Cordiale of Britain and France, signed in the early 20th century, 1903, 1904, is really the basis for the globalist system today. It is when people say, what are the globalists? Look at the British-French Entente Cordiale, and you get a very clear sense of what institutions, what structure, what outlook is the globalists in running globalization. But he mentioned something about Chicago and gang activity. And I just said, well, what is the gang condition in the United States? And of course, we have AI and research capabilities now. Much of this is from the FBI Uniform Crime Reporting Program, National Incident-Based Reporting System, FBI Crime Data Explorer System. Gang activity in the United States is extensive. But maybe not as big as you think. So we have approximately 1 million gang members in the United States. So that's 1/3 of 1% of the U.S. population. They commit 50% of all violent crimes. So 1/3 of 1% of the American population is committing 50% of violent crimes. Violent crimes, murders. So 2024, 15,000 murders. happen nationally. Just take half of those, and that's the gang activity. Rape, 140,000. These are the ones reported. I used to live in Oakland, California. The police would actually tell you, unless you're actually getting physically assaulted or about to be killed, we're not going to come and see you. So in these cities, like Oakland or south side of Chicago, when the police are overwhelmed by violent crimes, they do not engage. And the crimes just go unreported. So I'm saying this is massive underreporting of certain crimes, but 15,000 murders, 140,000 rapes, 205,000 robberies, and 870,000 aggravated assaults. So 50% of those are committed by gang members, and about 850, and these are estimates, and these are conservative, I would believe, estimates. 850,000 of those are street gangs, 100,000 prisons. About 25 to 35% of all gang members are illegal aliens, illegal immigrants, illegal aliens. 25 to 35%. But that grows. It depends on what gangs. The largest gang in the country is 18th Street Gang. It's a Mexican Hispanic gang formed on the streets of Los Angeles from immigrants from Central America and Mexico. MS-13, we all know this one, from El Salvador. It's only 16,000. 18th Street is massive, 50,000. Gangster Disciples, 50,000. Latin Kings, 35,000. Crips, Bloods, each about 3,000, 4,000. The largest gangs are by all means the Hispanic gangs. Mexican Mafia, 20,000. Texas Syndicate, 25,000. So just to give you some sense of, but of course, that doesn't get you very quickly to 1 million. So you have these larger structures, and then you just have, it's kind of like an ecosystem. You have these large gang structures, and these gang structures are directly work with the cartels. The cartels basically contract with them, but they kind of all. So in Chicago, which is the largest gang activity in the country, 150,000 gang members. Los Angeles is at 80. The Bay Area, Oakland and San Francisco, 50,000. New York is estimated at 40,000. Atlanta, 25. Houston, 35. These are, I think, very conservative estimates. There are about 30, they estimate about 30% of suburban spillover. In Chicago, 150,000 gang members. That's more than double Los Angeles. And this is going to be largely concentrated in the south and then southwest of Chicago. And why Chicago? Because it's the logistic hub for the country. You can reach every part of the country pretty quickly from Chicago. And it means that the Midwest is devastated. If you look at the cities with the most violent crime in the United States, these are the top 5: Memphis, Detroit, Baltimore, St. Louis, Cleveland, Kansas City, DC, Milwaukee. You get the sense the Midwest is then dominated by this. You know, I lived in California for a long time. You kind of assume, well, it's bad here, but it's been bad here for a long time. You don't necessarily imagine that it's spread, but it's metastasized throughout the entire country. And remember, the point of this is that 50% of violent crimes, and of course, the environment for violent crimes is shaped then by this ecosystem dominated by these large groups. And then these large gang groups are then contracted as distribution systems. It's an entire corporate business, distribution systems for the larger drug cartels coming out of Mexico. So Sinaloa, but it's broader. It's not simply limited to any one. They don't contract with one. It's very a corporate ecosystem of gang, criminal, and drug distribution activity and human trafficking. So, you know, let me just break down a few more numbers. I don't think I want to dwell. I gave you a sense of some of the top 5. These are the cities that have over 100,000 citizens, 100,000 people. Memphis has 620,000 people. It's got a violent crime rate of 2,500 per 100,000 people annually. So that's about 2.5% of the Memphis population is inflicted with a violent crime every year. Detroit is basically 2 out of every 100, 2%. 2 out of every 100 people in Detroit are afflicted with a violent crime every year. Baltimore is a little less, 1.8%. St. Louis, 1.8%. Cleveland, 1.7%. These are the former industrial. Baltimore was one of the most industrial and wealthiest cities in the world. Major port on the Eastern Harbor, on the Eastern Coast, industrial city, steel city. These places, as we know, have been gutted, and the gangs have moved in. Like I said, about 25 to 35% of gang activity are illegal aliens. In Chicago, though, and in like Los Angeles, but Chicago's even more so. They're entirely Hispanic gangs that dominate the area. I mean, of course, there's an ecosystem of, I'm sure, poor black gangs, but the large gang activity in Chicago is Latin Kings, it is Gangster Disciples, it's some of these other groups. You could have 50% of gang activity by illegal aliens. And that means 25% of all violent crimes are coming from illegal aliens. And that it's a dominant factor in an area of poverty. It's a dominant factor in the kind of inciting of violence, the inciting of destruction, the inciting of lawlessness, and creating an overwhelming factor for police activity. I don't think I need to document this anymore. Let me make now the more important point. The biggest opposition to Trump is not, they'll say, some will say, of course, he should be supporting Ukraine. Others should say he should be pulling all support from Israel. You have these left-wing comments. They want war with Russia, but they want to support Hamas in Gaza. Or they won't say that way, but that's just kind of how the sides they choose in some sense. But their biggest concern is over immigration and ICE. And I get this from the campuses all the time. So the level of, you can tell, I took a sign to the campuses last week, Trump, the president of peace, blessed are the peacemakers. I thought some students would be actually very provoked to say, yeah, it's kind of amazing. But the opposite was true. They were basically more triggered. They thought I was rage baiting them because how dare you say that? And it's like, well, what about the peace deal? And they were cynical and flippant about that. Well, it's just for Israel, this and that. It won't hold. Gazans have been destroyed. Gaza's been destroyed. What's he doing to solve that? They know nothing about it. They just quickly, cynically disregard it as significant. And then they say, look what he's doing to the immigrants. Look what he's doing with ICE. Look what he's doing with the National Guard. And so it caused me to think through what is this operation? Because yes, of course, it's just a kind of Trump derangement syndrome on a certain level. They've just been convinced Trump is bad. And then they take any actions Trump takes that are strong, and they say, look, he's taking strong action. This has negative consequences. But what is Trump actually opening up in the country? It's without doubt, it's hard to sometimes fully appreciate it. And Trump sometimes just keeps expanding the number. I think he's now up to $20 trillion of investment, of capital investment into the United States. But there is no doubt, I see it here in Detroit. I see the tariffs on Canada are having an impact. Stellantis and companies are moving production from Canada into the United States, but that's not all they're doing. Stellantis is now making a $13 billion investment. A window company is making a $40 million investment into Pontiac. You have the Wall Street Journal covering the Sharpie company, Newell. It makes the Sharpie markers. They've located back to the United States, into Tennessee, $2 billion investment into capital automation of production. They've increased wages by 50%. They've increased quality product and reliability. They've increased profits, and they have not fired anyone. And they're making a better product, and they're making it in the United States. So the capital investment is real. The ability to produce things here, the question of profitability for other markets, the free traders aren't even making the case that you can get cheap labor in Vietnam or China. They're saying They have the automated systems. They have the automated technology and equipment and factories. They're saying they have a more advanced platform to produce things. Yeah, but you're still having to ship it, all the materials, all of the business over these oceans in a completely different country. The product quality is much lower, and there's no profit motive to do it. Yet there's a capital investment into the United States that has to be made up front, but that's just what an economy is. And this gets to some level where the battle that Trump has with the Wall Street crowd, because they're sitting on upwards of 10, 12 trillion dollars of cash that they're not lending, is to start lending. Now, even Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan are talking about a $1.5 trillion investment into American infrastructure over the next decade. These guys see the writing on the wall, and they're already beginning to pony up. But they're going to pick and choose. They don't want to have a broad-based distribution. This is partly why the Trump administration is trying to get small banks and medium-sized banks going again, because you need, like the gangs have an ecosystem, we need a banking ecosystem that can meet the industrial demand, the needs for credit at every level of production, from small mom and pop shops in small towns or even in big cities to the larger scale industries. Of course, the data centers, the big nuclear plants, they get all the kind of fancy PR, but the real production is happening on a broader distribution scale to these smaller areas. Trump's battle with Wall Street is to get them lending, because as Wall Street Journal says on Sharpie, well, but they had access to the credit. Exactly. Other places don't. But how do you prevent credit lending? Risk. It's too risky. It's too unstable. And the same argument is made of why can't you invest in, say, Southwest Pakistan, what they call Baluchistan? Because of terrorist activity, they're a breakaway. They don't believe in Pakistani government. They want to break away. They want their own province or territory autonomy. The same thing is said in Africa. If you create areas, the same thing is said about Gaza, that you can't invest in these areas because it's a war-torn area of perpetual conflict. And this is the imperial game. So conflict, so destruction, so kind of internecine warfare that goes on for generations, create these festering wounds of crime and violence and destruction and insanity and poverty, and they become so bad that nobody can justify investing into these areas. And yet the reality is that these cities, New York, Detroit, Chicago, and Los Angeles, were the big four of industrial production. Even for my generation, I'm a few years under 50. It's hard to imagine, and it may be even for people that are in their 70s, that New York, up until 1960, was an industrial powerhouse. The soot was so bad, they'd have to clean the windows on the buildings every day. There was so much industrial production that 3 out of every 10 people working in New York City, and all 5 of the boroughs, 30% were employed in manufacturing directly, not logistics, support, supplies, cleaning, maintenance, actual manufacturing production. 50% probably were engaged in productive work in the city of New York. And of course, Detroit was well known as an industrial powerhouse, Chicago, Los Angeles. People will know Jim Brown, the famous Cleveland Brown running back. He did an actual study, and he set up a whole, I think, charity or operation in Los Angeles, which is where he was from, because he saw it firsthand that when they pulled the automotive production areas out of Los Angeles, which were located in South Central, where the blacks from the South had moved into it during the war era and are gotten involved in the productive work of the wartime, then translated that into domestic production like in the auto sector or in aerospace. Once these things were gutted out and pulled out of the city and ultimately offshored, you had these festering areas of young black men with no real focus. And you get the Bloods and you get the Crips. And they start out as kind of places for young men just to have some kind of common bond, because they don't have the bond of working at the Ford or General Motors and so on plants. So it was where this gang activity initially formed, was pulling the industry out of these cities, Cities are built to handle heavy levels of industry and production. The infrastructure, the housing, the density of things is set up to facilitate, short commute times, the ability to raise kids, raise families, have homes. I mean, the cities were built to facilitate this. Parks, entertainment systems, community centers, neighborhoods. People would build their neighborhoods up and be close by to the heavy industrial and productive work. And the point is that if we're going to reindustrialize, if we're bringing back this capital investment, if companies are coming in and pouring investment in industry into these areas, some of it's got to be, completely greenfield development. You're building from scratch, like we did in Arizona with TSMC. And they thought it was impossible. We are already producing. I mean, America can make things. I mean, the news, breaking news, America can actually make things from Sharpie markers, better quality with a profit, with better jobs for people now not doing packaging, but they're now working on automated machines with higher wages, to making the most advanced semiconductor chips in the world. 4-nanometer chips are now being produced in Arizona. We've built the fab. I mean, probably a lot of Taiwanese built the fab, but we are now producing it in the United States. And for generations, we're going to have people now skilled in semiconductor production at the highest level. And that's only going to continue. But it's also going to be rebuilding these cities. And whether it's Oakland or Detroit, the second most violent city in the country, to south side of Chicago, can you make these investments if you have gang activity dominating with 50% or more of violent crimes and 50% of the gang members potentially being illegal aliens? You have to go in there and you have to clean that out. You have to bring in ICE, you have to bring in the National Guard, you've got to bring in the FBI and the DEA, and you have to clean these places up. You cannot make billions of dollars of investments in new factories, in new industrial production, to give people, the citizens there, the hardworking people that want a job. They don't want to work at 7-Eleven. They don't want to work at a pot shop or a liquor store. They want to work at a place that gives them dignity, that gives them community, that gives them brotherhood, that they're contributing something to the country that they can be proud in, that they have benefits, and they have long-term commitment. If they go in and work hard, they're going to get a paycheck, and they're going to have a sense that this is a 20 or 30-year job, maybe with some benefits. That's how the country functioned. That's what's threatening today. And it's an overwhelming threat to this globalist enemy and scourge. So this is what No Kings are attempting to defend: the right of gangs and illegal aliens to dominate the environment of the former industrial areas of our country that need to be reindustrialized. And if they are, if not only do we bring in the National Guard into Memphis, within 10 days, Memphis crime rates were down by 50%. And they took 1,700, serial criminals off the streets in Washington. The first week in Memphis, they rescued like 5 children from human trafficking. And our cities have become killing fields of young people, largely young blacks. And these No Kings are defending that. And the question, though, is if you bring in the National Guard, you end the crime and violence. People say, well, how long can it happen? Permanently. But it's not just permanently in a static condition. We're going to have a total change in dynamic with billions of dollars coming into these areas. And that's real money, not for gentrification, not for lipstick on the pig, not to make a nice shopping area for, affluent people coming in from the suburb. It's all great. I mean, they did it in Detroit. No one's complaining. I mean, it's not a problem. It just doesn't cut it. Detroit's still the second most violent city in the country. It's going to completely break what we know to be the stronghold of this Democratic Party cult. And that is the kind of the Democrat plantations in these cities, in these inner cities of black voters. because peace and stability and safety is one thing, but real long-term economic investment, capital investment of industrial production is a whole other thing. And that will break the Democratic Party for generations. They're holding on to the legacy of, in some sense, Lyndon Johnson, who famously said, we'll have the black vote for generations if we pass the Voting Rights Act. But the racial obsession of these Democrats and liberals and globalists has started to blow back on them. And ultimately, the underlying basis of our ability to wage such an effective war has been Trump's commitment to rebuild the country. Just bringing in the National Guard, just getting rid of the illegal aliens would be temporary measures that would only probably come back worse within five years or so. A change of a presidency and it would come back. But it's the tariffs, the capital investments, the reindustrialization, the energy build-out, the industrial build-out, the manufacturing build-out, the emphasis on building families and communities. This is going to change the entire dynamic of the country. And this is what has the enemy fully panicked. And it's that question. It's getting across this intervention by Trump, by MAGA, what our founder Lyndon LaRouche had intended going back to the 1960s, what I've been doing, what Tony's been doing, what Promethean action organizers have been doing for 50 years, or 25 years in my case, has been this same kind of focus. You've got to get a reconstruction and rebuilding of the country. Once we get that, every other festering problem can be solved and should be solved with aggressive activity, aggressive political force to clean up these other problems, because we've got to rebuild the country. And it's not to rebuild the country and screw every other country. It's rebuild our country out of the pit of deindustrialization and drug addiction and hedonism, rebuild our country to be viable, pull it together as a nation state, and demonstrate to all nations around the world how you do it, and then give them the advice and support for them to do it as well. It's to demonstrate, to lead the world, real American leadership. It's that kind of picture which is really challenging the kids on campuses. But there is a deeper hunger than anything I've seen. And as I started with this discussion, the moments of change of the lockdowns and the election, the November 3rd, that's because YouTube censors this stuff, but they still do, I'm sure. But the election deal, whatever. And January 6th, these questions provoked these young people. These young people were not even, were they even 16 when the lockdowns happened in 2020? They were under 16. And they're now engaging in a world that's been totally transformed. There is a kind of hunger and a kind of engagement that it expresses something of a revival. And you see it with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Charlie saw the same thing. He started going to these campuses two times a week to a different campus. He'd just fly around the country, setting up these events, the campus tours, the Prove Me Wrongs, twice a week after these things take place, because there's this growing hunger. There's this surge of activity. There's this revival of Christianity, a revival of not just the religion, but the civilization. As Charlie said, people that he's talking to are not becoming evangelical, they're becoming Catholic because they want the history of the development of this process. And there is within that course of that civilization of these 2,000 years moments when the Christianity itself is embraced from a grassroots kind of quality. There's a book by Thomas à Kempis called The Imitation of Christ, written in like 1473 or something, 1480, that was based on a kind of revival of a grassroots. What does it mean to live the character, the devotion, the service to God, the service to God's creation, a devotion and a militant-like devotion to the truth. And if you haven't read it, there are a series of meditations from Kempis's writings. But it captures a kind of revival that was also something that you see in Joan of Arc. That same quality of a revival of the highest quality of human identity as expressed in Christ, but universal and then increasingly re-accessed. The same is true with Dante, the subjective commitment of the individual. And these works, the Dante, the Augustine, these people that captured this quality of civilization are becoming revived within this younger generation. I mean, on a college campus, I'll have a student that's never doesn't know anything about me, gets captivated by some of the discussion, and stays around for 4 or 5 hours. Some students on Thursday checked into their class to make attendance. We were talking for like an hour. The police came and illegally kicked me off the campus. They have no basis to do so in law or in university guidance. It's just muscle. And the cops are nice about it. It's the university which is the problem. These kids were talking for an hour. They then got broken up by the police. They went and checked into their class for attendance, then found us off campus on a public sidewalk and talked for 2.5 hours more. One student went to a class for 2 hours, came back and stayed around for another 3 hours. There is a hunger. There's a hunger as you see it in Charlie Kirk's videos. How do I live my life? How do I navigate the society? How do I approach a career? How do I approach my education? I mean, it's not as if Charlie, he was a profound individual. I'm not taking anything away from him, but it's this environment he confronted. And it's not something that you would be, that it's not something it's not something turning point created. It is there emerging, as if out of the blue. And that's a phrase I'll never forget, because our founder, LaRouche, and Keisha was on this call probably around 2015. There was a debate around how a golden age occurs. Prior to Trump winning, before maybe he was even running, how does a golden age emerge? And someone had said it would emerge from the reintroduction of great works from the past. And Mr. LaRouche said, no, it comes as if out of the blue, and it becomes a kind of compulsion, a compelling force that people cannot abjure or deny, which is a famous phrase from a poet named Percy Shelley, who said that these kinds of moments in history happen, and they are the moments that shape the course of human history and the development of civilization. That there are forces compelling the hearts and minds of people they cannot abjure or deny. And it seems like that is very much alive, that this is kind of emerging, and there is a kind of engagement. And I would say that part of it is that Trump took the sacred cows, the NATO or globalization or open borders or deindustrialization. Obama said we would need a magic wand to bring manufacturing back. We have a magic wand. It's called tariffs, the fourth most beautiful word in the English language, so to speak. So these sacred cows were challenged. And it's not as if simply it's kind of like the famous child story of the king with no clothes, that for young people to hear someone finally say, this is just a bunch of, academic gobbledygook and mainstream media propaganda, but there's nothing substantial or real or necessary about a lot of these things. And in reality, the opposite of a lot of these institutions is actually what we should be doing. So some things are just, obvious from their face, but it's opened up a kind of an examination from this generation. And I think from the population broadly, again, it just becomes concentrated in younger people who are trying to figure out, what steps do I take in this question called life, like adult life? What do I do? It becomes more crystallized, more specific. And there's this real hunger and engagement there. And so we should just have that in mind. But this is the MAGA movement. This is the future of the country. It's the future leadership. These are kids that have lived their whole lives with iPhones, social media, school shootings, transgender fixations, massive drug legalization, the whole Obama drug legalization question, the bailouts, the massive money printing, the massive, speculation bubbles. And many of them, not all of them, some of them are just outright casualties to the cultural insanity, but many of them have survived all of this with agency, with a sense of, okay, that's been insane. Our generation, and across the board, the generation recognizes they are totally screwed. They are shafted. They look in every direction. It doesn't matter if they're casualties or heroes ready to act. They all agree we are shafted. But some of them want to build a way out. And you could see it. You see it with what Charlie was doing. If someone can give them a sense, how do we get out of this crisis? What's the pathway out? They start to engage, not because they're just straight follow, but they want to talk. They want to figure it out. They know they've got to be able to figure this out and carry their own responsibilities. And it's a compelling quality of engagement. I was on the campuses a lot 20 years ago, like all the time, practically every day. Nothing like this ever happened. It's totally uncanny. It's a completely different kind of phenomena. And it's something that we should all look to nourish as much as possible, because we are building an army to win a war for our nation and for our civilization. So I think that's what I wanted to say tonight. I think I covered a lot, and I'm very looking forward to your questions and thoughts. So Keisha, I'll hand it back to you and see what people think tonight.